Welcome to Business Leader Breakthroughs, where we help unlock the potential in you, your teams, and your business. I'm your host, Ryan Castle, along with Dr. Mike Ashby. We'll share insights, experiences, and stories on achieving breakthrough success in business and life. In addition to a podcast, The Breakthrough is a coaching and advisory business that provides programs for business leaders, owners, and managers to develop your skills and capabilities to boost your business and enjoy a better life. To learn more, click the link in the episode show notes or go to thebreakthrough.co. Now let the breakthroughs begin. Hi there, welcome along to this episode of the Breakthrough Leaders podcast. Mike, nice of you to join me again.
Nice to be here.
You're doing a good job of that. Yeah. It's good. Yeah. Hey, I wanted to chat today about growing businesses, and it's something we do a lot with our clients, helping them understand how they can grow. It seems to be that it's a very common aspiration for businesses. We don't come across too many that don't want to grow. We're not always obsessed with growing revenue. We like growing profit, particularly as a measure. But thinking about how do we actually grow an organisation, I think we often get trapped in the sense of, kind of overwhelm. I'm just kind of keeping up with today's business. And we help them a lot thinking about what's the frameworks that they might be able to use to think about not just today's business, but what tomorrow's might look like. What's been your experience, Mike, with clients in that space?
Well, funny you should say that. Because I had this conversation yesterday with a couple of business owners. He replied to a recent blog and he said, just thought you'd like to know that, as part of the program, you asked us to kind of write down an unthinkable goal, something that neither I nor anyone else thought we'd achieve. And he said, I just want to report in that I have just sold the business for, and he's 55, I think. He's currently off in the US somewhere. He's actually, I didn't realise until I caught up with his son has taken over and another guy. Roger has been travelling the world for the last 4 or 5 years.
Good lad.
Hasn't been involved at all. That number that he wrote down, he said, you might be interested to know that the revenue that we achieved on sale was 4 times that number.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 4 times what he initially thought was unthinkable.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah. He was a smart guy, but the program just helped him structure his thinking about how and where to grow. One of the things he did was he did an acquisition. So, let's get that one on the table straight away.
And was it some kind of like sexy high growth tech company where they had massive multiples and
it is an exterior washing company. Right. Yeah, they wash the outsides of dirty buildings. Houses too.
So not something we typically associate with being a high growth industry.
Not a high growth. And in fact, they're not even very big businesses. They're very, very profitable. So to the point, why was he able to kind of travel the world on fairly modest revenue? Because it was wonderfully profitable. And his acquisition was the next door neighbour franchise. So, again, it wasn't any kind of great global monopoly, private monopoly thing. It was just smart thinking, well-run businesses.
Oh, look, I think we've, both of us have reflected where, with the boards we've been on, we've seen organisations that have massively grown their revenue and reduced their profit.
Oh yeah. In fact, I'm working with a company right now who had, kind of let's get out there and grow. We're going to grow 3-fold in the next 5 years, and they acquired this and they acquired that, and just all fell to bits. Seriously fell to bits. And that team is now gone.
Right. Which is not to say that acquisition can't be done well, but it's just growing revenue for the sake of growing revenue is not always the smartest path.
We had this conversation about trying to create a kind of a vision statement, and we were really struggling because the component bits of the organisation, whenever we tried to say, we're in this industry, well, yes, but this part's in that industry, or else we kind of go really high level to be completely meaningless. And it occurred to me, I said, the problem we've got here is we're trying to kind of do a market-driven vision when this was not a market-driven acquisition. This was a shareholder-driven acquisition. This was to boost the revenue ahead of sale. There was no other logic to it. So you're trying to kind of bash a square peg into a round hole. So we did some other stuff. We got around it, but it was a really interesting kind of, yeah, no, there is no logic to it. We can't kind of retrofit a market logic to something that was driven by completely different imperative.
Okay, so if we are looking to grow our businesses and we have aspirations higher than 5% more on last year's budget, you know, we want to be a little more broad thinking than that. What's a framework we might be able to use to help with that thinking?
We use something that was developed many, many years ago, like I think 40 years ago, called the Ansoff Matrix. Right. And it's just a really simple way of thinking about your sources of growth. Look, again, I used it yesterday with these guys. They said, well, we just want a couple more big customers. So in the Ansoff Matrix, that is existing product to new customers. Yep. And we talked a little bit about how to acquire those, you know, how do we look for those? And my advice around that was quite simply, well, who are your best customers now? Who are your top 5? Who are some other companies like that? Yep. And that got to be quite an interesting conversation, because it turns out they're not so much direct customers as through management services companies. Right. Okay, so that's a different proposition. You know, who's got the contracts of the dirty buildings, etc. As a piece of thinking about it, that wasn't that hard. It's kind of, you know, find more like that.
So just to maybe lay out the framework, the Ansoff Matrix, you know, Google it. It's a great tool that I've used a lot in my coaching as well. But just to lay it out, you really think about the two axes being products and markets, and then there are new and existing versions of each. So there's new products, new markets, existing products, existing markets. You obviously end up with 4 different quadrants out of that. And it just, you know, I've equally used it as a great framework just to go, where could we grow? And I've found it really helps owners and leaders think about those different areas that they could get into.
Actually, I suppose as I think about that, I've used markets and customers pretty much interchangeably.
Yes.
So I've got new products, and what I was talking with these guys about yesterday was, so they were talking about existing products, new customers. And that's fine. That's the
market development.
Market development, yeah, it is. But the other bit that we did talk about quite specifically was, well, what other services can you provide to your existing customers? You've developed this reputation with them in this relationship, which is gold. You have proven yourself. Have you got other services that you can then provide to them that don't go too far away from the core? Because they were a bit nervous about that. They used a lovely example. They said, oh, we'd been cleaning the exterior of one place, and we noticed that their gutterings were leaking a lot of rain in this part of the world. And so clearly the facility service people hadn't been doing that job. So they sent a truck down and got the guy to clean out the guttering and fix it, you know, patch it up. And they reported this to the customer, and they said, oh, we're so sick of the guy who's been doing that, you know, the crowd that's been doing that. Do you want the contract? Without moving very far away from their corridor. It's just a little bit of redefinition. You're not just an exterior washing company, you are a building maintenance company. And that includes, well, you know, in the course of a few minutes we identified there was all of that kind of guttering maintenance, there was all of the window cleaning exterior, actually window cleaning interior. You know, there were actually a range of services that you didn't have to expand your infrastructure, you didn't have to expand your overhead, you could do it profitably and effectively, all inside that relationship. And so that was a case of new product to existing customers.
Yes.
And it is a whole lot easier, isn't it?
It is so much easier. You know, the acquisition of new customers that you have no relationship, no trust, no credibility with is so much harder than selling a new service that can help out your existing customer.
Oh, totally. And we've found this, you know, we've found that we've just over time evolved with customers, developed new products with them. And so a lot of our members are people who've been with us for many, many years as a consequence.
I think the caution here is because one customer thinks that's a good idea, it's really good to go and validate the market. So get out, talk to some of your other customers and going, this is the experience I just had with this customer. They've asked us to look at doing guttering and window cleaning and whatever other services. If we were to bring something to market like that, would that be of interest to you? Because I think we can fall into the trap of going, we've got a market of one at the moment, let's go and add people, infrastructure, more tools, more things into the mix to get it going. And if you haven't validated that properly, you can fall into a trap.
And by the way, what you've described, as we know, is actually one of the most wonderful ways to have a prospecting conversation. It's actually a sales conversation in drag. The other conversation we've been having lately is around price.
Yes. And
pricing strategy. And in a couple of places we've had this conversation that's been very kind of, and it's such a fundamental. And the conversation we had the other day was, I've always kind of gone in on keeping our prices up, right? Don't want to be the cheapest, etc., etc. In this case, a new competitor's come into the market. They are pricing aggressively because the two strategies for pricing are really simple. There's price for profit and there's price for share. And both are legit. And I remember that when I was on a kiwifruit packhouse company, and PSA had just struck. It was a major disease and it wiped out a whole lot of the crop. It was going to be a race to the bottom. The market just wanted lower prices. And we were in a...
Help me understand the economics of that. Why would, if there was a smaller crop of fruit available, why was it going to push price down? I would have thought they would push price up.
Because there was way more supply of storage space.
Right, sorry, got it.
Yeah. So that drove price down.
Yes, got it.
So it was on the storage side, So in fact, in the market, of course, the kiwi fruit price did go up because of the scarcity. But so we were locked in a kind of a competition with a company, and we actually had a meeting about potential mergers, and they complained about the fact that we were driving price down. And I actually said, we're going to be doing that again this year, aren't we? And they kind of, no. And it wasn't long after that we effected a merger. It was a takeover. They had nowhere to go. They couldn't compete on price. So that, it doesn't matter how attached you are to your quality and all of that stuff. There are times when you need share. And one of those times is when you're thinking about going into a new market. Now, the way these new entrants have come into the market, how else were they going to turn the heads and take business away from the incumbents? You've got to go in there with some reason, and this is that they had just lost a tender. Their price was about the same as the incumbent. Their quality was a bit higher, but they didn't have the relationship. They weren't known to them. They were a strong second. We hate strong second. Strong second totally sucks, right? A lot of work in the tender, a huge amount of work. If they'd gone in at 15 to 20% less, they could have still made money, not as much, but they could have made money, and they would have got the work. So you've got to give in that kind of business acquisition, you've got to give a new customer a reason to switch, and that's usually price, because unless they're really clear about the quality they need, that's kind of, it's not quite quality schmolity. You might have a very defective incumbent, but you've still got to be able to turn their heads.
In a upcoming podcast, we'll actually talk about the competitive tripod, as we call it, where there are really only three ways you can compete in market, being price, the effectiveness of your product or service, or customer experience. And we'll talk about the rules around that. And I think that is such a great guideline for then how you think about price. And pricing into a market to get share initially doesn't have to be your pricing strategy for the long term.
That's correct.
That's correct. So we might start off with a pricing for share strategy, and then we move to a pricing for profit.
And there's an old saying, win on price, keep on service.
Yes. It's a goodie.
So new products to new customers? Don't do it.
It is definitely the highest risk. You are dealing with people you don't know with a product or service that you're not fundamentally expert in yet. There is areas where diversification or that strategy of new products to new markets is really valid, but it would only be a portion of your growth strategy. I think going forward, you might be looking at what we'd refer to as your Horizon 2 or Horizon 3 models in your business, thinking, probably the 18 months to 3 years out, going, where is our market moving, what's going on? And you might be going, look, the market we're in is very mature. It's starting to move into decline.
Into commodity.
Yep. Actually, our ability to further grow that market is going to be limited. So our near-term growth might be in one of those other strategies we've already talked about, and now we need to start exploring diversification.
One of the mistakes I hear people make, including myself, is we think about the opportunity. We think, oh yeah, they would probably buy that kind of service. And unfortunately, the answer is that is so true. They do, and it's called from an incumbent. They already buy that stuff. We look at it and see what we've got and see their need and think it's a match. There's already somebody there. That's one of the things to work through at the diversification is do the validation piece really carefully. Do the work, take the time, because it is the highest risk. It's the highest likelihood of falling over.
So I think in our do's and don'ts around this, so use the Ansoff Matrix as a bit of a framework. It'll help unlock some thinking about where you can do and what you can do. Think about staying away from diversification as your main growth strategy. Have an element possibly in there, but don't make it your main.
It's like your venture capital investment. It should be money you're prepared to lose.
Yes.
Or effort you're prepared to waste.
In the what not to do, a trap I've seen organisations fall into often is going, we want another big customer. You referenced that as a scenario. Actually dig into just how profitable your biggest customer is.
Yeah, for sure.
Often they're the ones that exert the most influence over your organisation. If they're a significant part of your revenue, they tend to be the ones that ask for the sharpest pricing. You're over-servicing them possibly because you perceive them to be so important. And we have seen members of ours that once they've done that review of what they thought was their most important customer, they've actually gone, now that we think about it, that customer is costing us money. We'd actually be better off letting them go, freeing up the resource to then allocate to more profitable customers. So that could result in you having a smaller top line revenue, but a way more profitable business, and a business that your team actually enjoys working in, because we've also found that often your biggest customer is your most demanding.
Well, one of the things that we did yesterday, even in the brief conversation, I hadn't met these guys before, it was just a kind of general conversation, but there's a very large dairy company, and they are, everybody thinks great potential, so big, etc., etc. They are diabolical. It is a cemetery for small businesses.
Throw their weight around like the schoolyard bully.
90-day terms, always driving the price down, always insisting on impossible kind of service standards. But, we're this company, we're the giant, and you get the privilege of supplying us your blood, sweat, and your firstborn. We'll have that too. So these guys were smart enough to say, no, we won't be doing that. Which is, and that's a really good decision.
Superb. So team, we'd really like to hear back from you on comments around this podcast. If you think there's members in your circle, your network that could get some assistance from this podcast, we'd love to see you share it out to them. Comment back. If you've got your own insights into good growth models that you've used successfully in your own business, we'd love to hear back from those. We're always looking to learn ourselves. Thanks for joining us today.